Hello, everyone. I am slowly but surely getting the hang of Facebook Live. I am wearing my coat because it's chilling here in San Miguel and the houses don't have heat and there's no insulation. I'm loving the cooler temperatures though. It's really, really nice. So today I'm going to be talking about. Sorry, my head is tipped the wrong way. Today I'm going to be talking about the 4 month sleep regression, which everyone's heard of, and is when your sweet little baby's sleep habits just suddenly go off the rails. So maybe they were waking up once or twice at night, and now suddenly they're waking up every 2 hours, taking short naps. They're fussy, they're irritable. Can't go to sleep on their own, you're suddenly nursing or bottle feeding multiple times a night. And this sleep regression can happen anywhere from like 3.5 months to 5 months. Every baby's different. So it isn't exactly 4 months. So the reason for the 4 month sleep regression is that babies' sleep cycles mature. So starting at about 6 to 8 weeks of age, around the time that babies start to have a social smile, their bodies also start to have circadian rhythms. So before that time, night and day are pretty much the same for most newborns. Some sleep better at night, but they typically sleep, at the most 3 or 4 hours, could be less, especially for breastfed babies. They wake up and eat basically the same during the night as they do during the day. And then at around 6 to 8 weeks, they start to have a sense of when is nighttime. And you often will start to see a longer stretch of sleep. 4 to 6 hours is common. For some babies, it can be longer. And then, but daytime sleep is still typically erratic. Usually the first stretch of sleep is the longest. So for tired new parents, definitely try to go to sleep as early as you possibly can, because if your baby goes to sleep at 6 or 7 or 8 at night, then like that's gonna be your best chance to sleep, even though it's super hard to go to sleep that early. Bedtimes typically creep gradually earlier. So a newborn might go to bed at 10 or 11 at night, 2 month old, maybe 9, and it's going to gradually get earlier. And then after that first stretch of 4 to 6 hours, typically the feedings will be more like every 3 hours, depending on your baby's feeding patterns. So then at around 4 months, roughly, your baby's sleep gets more mature and they really biologically are ready to sleep through the night. Some babies still need to eat at night. It's pretty common, but they don't need to be getting up to play in the middle of the night, which they may do, at 4 weeks old. So the tricky thing is that what typically happens is in the newborn period, parents get used to helping their baby fall asleep, which is totally natural and normal. But then at about 4 months, that stops working as well, and babies start needing more and more help to fall asleep instead of less. And the things that worked really well before stop working as well. And then everybody ends up being exhausted. And so oftentimes parents of 4 month olds are actually more tired than parents of newborns. So if this is you, there is definitely help for you. There is some hard work involved, for sure. So the problem is at this point, your baby has a sleep association with you, whether it's being rocked or petted or fed to sleep. And the problem is when your baby wakes up in the middle of the night, he or she doesn't know how to put herself back to sleep because she didn't put herself to sleep in the first place. So imagine if you went to sleep in your bed with all your warm covers and you woke up in the middle of the night on the living room floor cold without any bedding. Like, you'd be really startled, and your baby is too. So he or she wants to recreate the same environment that she had or he had when falling asleep. But the problem is that environment involved being cozy in your arms, which means you aren't sleeping. So the trick here, and it's not an easy one, is helping your baby learn to fall asleep in the crib or bassinet. And there's faster and slower ways to do it. The faster ones typically require less help from you, but there's more crying for the first few nights, and then it typically goes very quickly. For parents who want to be more involved, that also works. You can stay in the room, patting and shushing. Um, but the critical piece is having your baby remember falling asleep in the crib so that when they wake up in the crib in the middle of the night at the end of a sleep cycle, as we all wake up during the night, he or she knows exactly what to do to go back to sleep. So if, let's see. One other thing is when the sleep regression happens, if you've been doing a dream feed, then I would suggest weaning off of that because the first stretch of sleep is the most restful. So if you want to keep 1 or 2 feedings during the night at 4 months, that's still totally reasonable. Just move them later so that the first feed is after midnight. And I can definitely talk to you about how to do that. You don't need to do it overnight. You can do it gradually, but your baby will be less overtired simply by moving that first feeding later. So the great news is that the 4-month sleep regression is largely avoidable. I would say most people don't avoid it, but it is possible. Neither of my kids went through that sleep regression, at least that I was aware of. And the trick to that is to start working on independent sleep habits before 4 months, before they are old enough to have FOMO and to be like, hey, where was that lovely warm body that rocked me to sleep so lovingly? A few suggestions that I have for working with newborns to prevent the 4-month sleep regression. Number 1 is keep your baby's awake intervals short. For a newborn, they're typically 45 to 60 minutes awake, and that is from the moment they wake up. So that includes the feeding and the diaper change. So sometimes there might not be any time to play. If there is playtime, it might be 5 or 10 minutes. Like it could be really, really short. With my kids, I aim to put them down as soon as I saw that first yawn. Your baby won't look tired yet. It'll feel really weird, and everyone will think that you're crazy, as they did for me. They thought I was like way too strict. But usually, if you put them to sleep at this time, it goes really, really quickly. And babies' naps are really variable in length at this age. So don't worry about the clock. Don't worry about what time it is. Just go by, how long they've been awake. So again, 45 to 60 minutes. By 2 months old, it could be as long as 60 to 75 minutes. So preventing your baby from ever getting overtired is going to make a world of difference. So if there's only one thing you can do, I would definitely do that. Another thing would be to try to have some of their sleeps in their crib or bassinet in the bedroom where you want them to sleep. Ideally, at least 1 nap a day plus bedtime. More is great. If you can manage it, it definitely doesn't need to be all of them. With newborns, trying to be home for them to sleep in the bed every 40, after only 45 minutes all day is going to be really stressful, especially if you have an older child or you have other things you need to get done. And then for me, with my kids at about 6 weeks, I started to set a schedule of feeding, which is definitely controversial. I did breastfeed both of my children successfully, so it did not impact my ability to do that. But I found that feeding them about every 3 hours led to much better sleep at night. They started to sleep longer, and then at 8 weeks, and this is definitely more controversial, I put them on an every 4-hour feeding schedule, and I never insist on this with my clients, and I sometimes even hesitate to mention it because I think a lot of people do think it's really severe, but for both of my kids, it was actually really easy. They fed much better, and their night sleep lengthened out immediately to basically sleeping 10 hours straight, and then they kept that up. And with, as they passed through that 4-month period, they did fine. But the big thing is to have them sleep in their crib at least, or bassinet at least some of the time, and to work towards starting at about 6 weeks, if not earlier, having them fall asleep independently at least some of the time. And it doesn't mean that you have to like leave them crying in the crib. It means like put them in the crib awake and you can stay with them and pat them and shush them. And as they get better, help less and less. Like wait a minute before you interfere. Try not to pick them up right away and see what happens. A lot of times, if they can't do it alone, it could be that minimal help is enough, like just shushing them or just patting them or even just standing next to the crib can be enough to help them get over the hump. Um, the big thing with any age baby is to prevent overtiredness. So anytime you see your baby getting tired, get them to sleep as soon as you can. And if they need help at that nap, they can't do it on their own, no problem. Help them and then try again the next time or the next day. And if you keep trying, they will eventually get it. You can do it very gently, very gradually. And hopefully you never get to that 4-month sleep regression. But if you do get to that 4-month sleep regression, don't worry, hope is not lost there. It is definitely a solvable problem. So if any of you are struggling with this situation, I'd love to chat with you. Send me a message to my Facebook or go on my website, which is peacefulparentsleepcoaching.com. I'd love to chat with you. Bye.